Hello and welcome back to Property Matters on iProperty Radio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iProperty Radio or email hello@ipropertyradio.com. My first guest this week is Mary Conway, returning guest, and she is the founder of Janus Estates and also the newly elected chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association. Mary, you're very welcome back. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Carol. I can't remember when we spoke last. It's about a year ago, is it?
It might be, and at that
Yeah.
stage we were talking about Janus Estates, and do you know it's funny? We've been doing, we're approaching almost 4 years of doing this show, and actually my interview with you is one of the ones that I'm asked about most often because people were not aware that your service existed. So before we get into talk about the Irish Property Owners Association, let's talk about Janus Estates. Maybe remind people who aren't familiar what it is that you do.
Well, I suppose there's two sides to my business. My background is in nursing, and then I've been involved in property for about nearly 30 years at this stage. So I've always been interested in where my patients used to go, where would they be discharged to, and whether, they had proper supports in place or what needed to be done to modify their homes to move back home, particularly after difficult surgeries. So I looked at senior move management as a career, and senior move management is somebody who works with usually an older client to look at their home, see what needs to be modified or set up. And it might be something simple as just rearranging their kitchen cupboards, that everything is at a lower level that they can access, or working around their bathroom or their bedroom, or decluttering a living room. And then also people who want to get out of their home totally and want to move into a smaller space. And then the other side of my business is traditional sales and letting and property management. So the senior move management and age in place has been fairly quiet. And I suppose the reason is there's not that many places that people can move to, because people still want to live within their community. They want to access to a bus, to their shops, to their GP. And, with development land and the cost of development land, there are not that many developers building what we would call retirement communities, I suppose, for want of a better word. And, over 55s really that we're looking at, but most people in Ireland are looking at moving when they're in their 80s. And at that stage, it's really too little too late. So what my narrative needs to be around changing the attitude about moving at an earlier stage. And I'm working with one really nice client at the moment. He lives abroad and he has just turned 65. He's really active. He climbs mountains, he cycles, he swims, and he's living abroad for the last couple of years. He's got a house in Dublin, and he rang me on the back of another podcast where he had heard me, and he said, look, I need help. My biggest thing is I want a downstairs bathroom and my house is really cold. So I'm working with a builder now, and we're looking at insulating his house to a really high standard, putting in a kitchen, a new kitchen that will take him into his old age. And as he said, he wants to be carted out of a box from this house. So we're doing everything possible to future-proof it. And this is somebody who, I'd say old age is another 20 years possibly when he's 85, that he'll need these modifications. But he's been a joy to work with because he's so, I want to do this now while I have the capacity, the mental and physical capacity to do it.
That's really interesting, Mary, because in Ireland we haven't really had that mentality of moving homes at that stage, but that's because traditionally Irish people just don't move homes.
Yes.
It's not something we do. But do you think that part of it is around the language? If we talk about sheltered housing or elderly housing, I mean, in the people you're speaking to, if they have their own private homes, do they want to go into any sort of sheltered elderly living facilities, or are they just looking for a more manageable home for themselves?
Yeah. They're looking at a more manageable home for themselves, and there's some really nice high-end luxury developments starting now. Again, planning has been the problem, and I've been in consultation with some of the guys that are setting these up, and like the facilities are just amazing. And these would be high end for people who want to sell their nice house in Dublin 4, Dublin 6 and move into something a bit more manageable, but still have their own hall door. And I suppose an awful lot goes back to the Irish mentality. You need your front door, your back door, and your garden. And that apartment living doesn't work, which of course is not true. And the client I'm working with who's moving back from abroad has lived in various countries around the world. So I think he is more open to moving than most people. And the other thing is, a lot of people feel that they can't sell their big home because the money is needed for their children to get their children on the property ladder or whatever. And will people think that they're doing, you know, what will people think that they're not leaving a legacy to their children? So there's lots of
that's a lot of Irish baggage as well for people to be carrying. And you know, I was looking over the last 2 years, you know, we've been researching what's happening in other areas that have low supply and high affordability issues, and across certain US states, certainly along the West Coast, but right up as far as Alaska, there's legislation was changed to allow for these, I think they're called ancillary dwelling units. So essentially you can build you know, whether it's a one bed chalet or something in your garden, provided that you let it to someone you know. So as in, if you have a family member that needs to rent it out, and there are different jurisdictions, different states have different rules. But, you know, one of the things that we talked about a couple of years ago, now this is going back to maybe 2011 and 2012 when new apartment blocks were being built. And at the time, I remember working with home buyers who were looking to potentially trade down. And again, these might have been people, you know, maybe not 50s, but certainly kind of 60s up. And again, and a problem identified was that people want to stay in their own communities, and where large blocks were being built was tended at that time to be outside of the community. So for example, like if you look at anything that was being built in across Stillorgan, they weren't being built within walking distance of the shops and the dry cleaners and the takeaways and things like that, which is what people need at the local pharmacies, the church, whatever it is that they visit. And the one thing we know is that people do better when they're within their own communities. And yet, if you look, we have so much potential to build for infill. So we've got developments, housing estates from kind of the 50s, 60s, and even 70s that have very large gardens. Some of those gardens, particularly areas that are unused, that are actually being protected against antisocial behaviour, that could actually be used as infill sites for small, you know, maybe under kind of 800 square feet homes or under 1,000 square feet homes. So there's definitely the potential for more building. But it's like the mentality hasn't reached in Ireland that, you know, that it's okay not to have your front and back door and your garden, as you've rightly specified. But our design, I think our design has failed us, you know, because again, having lived in apartments that were small but very well designed compared to 3-bed semis here that are pretty badly designed, or certainly have been badly designed. Space isn't the issue, design is the issue. But planning has been such an impediment to that. How do you see that's going to change in time for the type of clients, you know, that actually want to maybe downsize and free up their homes? And not only that, but their homes are probably on very large gardens that could actually accommodate a second home. Is this something that people even think about?
It's funny because I have an example actually directly opposite my own house. I live in Glasnevin, and there was a very large detached house opposite me with about 100-foot garden to the road. And the people in the house decided they were selling the house, but they were going to build a house in the garden. So they built a 1,500 square foot 2-bed house. And at the end of the kitchen, there's the plant room, because it's one of these high energy A-rated houses. And there is a lift that brings them directly up into their bedroom. And it's just got 2 bedrooms, 2 really large bedrooms that it's really easy to move around. And that's the best example I've seen. And they did this when they were in their mid-60s. And, you know, they've released, I'm sure, some cash from it as well. They're very active. They go traveling a lot, but they have this really energy efficient house. And I'm just wondering now, with all, you know, there's so much talk about energy and older people and fuel poverty. is it going to change things a little bit with regards to, well, maybe an apartment might be a better idea than trying to heat a 3-bed house that most of the rooms aren't used in?
Oh, I think it absolutely is. And I think that's a conversation that is definitely kicked off. And you know, it's interesting. I can remember working with home buyers at the time when BER certs were, um, when they were being introduced, and the media commentary was very different to the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is that home buyers actually didn't care. They didn't pay more or less for the BER cert. They didn't care about it. The only person that cared about it was their solicitor to be able to sign off on it was part of the conveyancing paperwork that was required. And I've been criticised in the past for saying that, but that was the reality. Home buyers didn't care. That could not be more different now. Now we're having conversations around people actually potentially moving home to something more energy efficient. So many things have changed over the past decade or a decade and a bit. But this is one thing that I think the energy conversation, whether it's in terms of finances or the climate crisis, that's definitely a conversation that has shifted, and it is going to impact how we buy and how we use and how we design and how we plan our homes so much more. But Mary, I could talk to you all day on the senior move management, because I think it is, and I think it is an issue that is you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg now in Ireland. I think so many more people need this but aren't aware that it's possible, or they have these hang-ups about having to retain the home for the next generation. So there's so much that needs to shift still in that across the certainly the Irish consciousness, and I think that's starting to happen. So you're well placed for that. But I mentioned at the start of the interview that you are the newly elected this year chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association. So again, the IPOA is well known in terms of media circles for speaking out, for representing property owners, but you might just explain what the organisation does and maybe what your mandate is.
Yes, the Irish Property Owners was founded almost 30, we're going to celebrate our 30th anniversary next year. And it was set up really to bring professionalism to landlords and to give landlords information on best practice. And we run things like different training courses for landlords, webinars. There was a really successful webinar on last Thursday night. I think we had about 200 people with regards to making a will when you've got property. And a lot of our landlords would be older, and they've been in the business a long time, and they're looking for guidance on things like the RTB, how do you work out how to use the new online system, the new fee that you have to pay every year. How does all that work out? And a lot of them would be not really computer literate, and they're used to doing everything by paper. I've worked with some of them, and their records are absolutely amazing. They're so meticulous, but they're always terrified that they will do something wrong. So we're there really, I suppose, to help and support them, and then give a voice for things like, what's happening with the budget. Or I presented at the Oireachtas there recently on the housing crisis. So it's a great organisation right around the country. Our members are from everywhere. And they're from maybe one property landlords to landlords that have 50, 60 properties, but they're in the minority.
Mary, so much has happened even in the last year across rental. Like everybody is aware that we have an absolute rental crisis in Ireland. It's an absolute shortage of properties, and we know that since 2018, we know that landlords have been exiting the Irish market. So some of those were people who were never supposed to be there in the first place, as in accidental landlords that didn't choose it, they were there by default. So they were exiting, that's one thing. But we know that people who were looking at their investment property as their pension, that we know that they are exiting the market at a rate of 2 to 1, as in for every one investor coming into the market, at least 2 are leaving. And that hasn't changed. And in recent times, the government acknowledged that actually not only do we need to attract new landlords into the market, we need to stop landlords exiting the market. And so they're saying this, and yet the policy decisions certainly don't support that. In fact, if anything, the policy decisions are things that would make landlords who were on the fence more determined to leave. So across your members, how are they receiving the policies that have been kind of communicated over the last year in terms of the eviction ban, the continual calls for rent control, the price caps that are 1/4 the rate of inflation? How are they? And of course, more onerous legislation. And in terms of compliance, you mentioned the RTB. It's gone from registering per tenancy to registering per year, and there wasn't great communication around that. And in fact, we saw policymakers themselves fall victim to this, which probably didn't help. Anything in the month leading up to the budget, landlords really got a bad rap again. So how are your members navigating this, and how are they receiving it? Do they feel appreciated in the Irish market?
They're leaving in vast numbers. And, the left policy will tell you that they're leaving because the accidental landlords are now getting capital appreciation and leaving. But for the most part, our members would have been in it for the long haul and bought properties as their pension. And they just see with tax of 55% on their rental profits, when institutional landlords aren't paying any profit, and the institutional landlords are the ones coming in with the high rents, and the ordinary landlord is stuck with 2%. They feel that it's very unfair, and they just want out. And I suppose what concerns me more is, you will always have attrition, you will always have people leaving in a market, but you would always hope that they would be replaced by somebody else. And that's not really happening, because why would you get into the market as a landlord now? There's really no incentive. Tax is too high, legislation is too high. And then, for example, if I sell a property and the rent has been capped, and I can give you an example of a couple I know that I'm selling a property for, and they bought it as a couple and then they split up and they went on to marry somebody else, and they're both supporting this property now with regards to the mortgage. The rent has been €1,100 for the last 11 years. The going rate in the area is about €1,800. But no other landlord is going to come and buy that property, because he will be stuck at 1,100 plus the rent cap of 2%. So even if they were able to change the legislation, that if a landlord bought a property that was below market rent, that they could bring it to market rent, that would be one small incentive for people to get in.
This is a point that I know was brought up to the Oireachtas, and I know Pat David of IPOA has been very vocal on the airwaves, making the same point. There doesn't appear to be any appetite at all to receive that in terms of policy.
I don't think the government really realise how bad things are with regards to, we need private landlords, whether we like it, whether the government like it or not. I think they thought the institutional landlords coming in was going to be the salvation to everything. But they're the ones that are providing the very nice properties in the nice parts of the city to the tenants that can afford large rents, purely because they're being subsidised by their companies to be in the country and get a nice, generous rent allowance. Whereas our members are, every part of the country, every type of tenant, from a single person to a family. So there's definitely a two-tier rental market, and that's really not fair.
What are your priorities? There's so much to be done. And before we wrap up today, I can appreciate there's so much to be done in terms of your work with the IPOA. What are your immediate priorities? Because we know that obviously the eviction ban has been put in place until March next year. What's on your task list?
Well, I suppose we're looking at the eviction ban. We're really not making any comment on it at the moment till it's published, because when we looked at what the information we've got so far, there's quite a few grey areas in it. And I suppose our concern is the eviction ban would stay, that, we would hope it's only going to be until March, because our members do need to sell properties for various reasons. People are in trouble with the bank, there are marriage breakups, houses need to be sold to provide a family home for somebody else. There's lots of areas. So, we're just taking things very cautiously with the eviction ban for the moment.
Okay, Mary, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. Look, we haven't even scratched the surface of some of the policies that need to be discussed, those facing homeowners and investors. but actually we might connect with you at a later time when we've more details and more information around that. But for now, thank you so much. That was Mary Conway of Janus Estates and Chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association. We need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.